Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Surf Sales Podcast. We are officially on episode 165. James, we are here with James Mackey, who is the CEO of Secure Vision, who's going to explain what that is and why that's important in general, and to understand where his context of answers will come from as it relates to sales and or leadership and those kinds of things. Obviously, we've got a quick shout out to our sponsors of Lead 411. We also need to talk about Find Them, as well as Gong.io. And what's the fourth one? Predictive, Scott? Perception Predict, right? Which helps you determine whether or not people are actually going to hit their number. Find Them also, just because they're new sponsors, we like to talk about them a little bit. They help you find those A players who are in a passive job search, meaning they already have the job that they think they want until they've discovered you. So be sure to check those folks out, as well as Gong and Lead 411. So thanks to our sponsors. James, first and foremost, where are you dialing in from?
I'm in Northern Virginia, Sterling.
Got it. Cool.
You're familiar with the area? Yeah.
Not entirely, but I know where Virginia is based on my son's fifth grade geography.
Good stuff.
And just out of curiosity, tell people what Secure Vision does, what it's like, just even from a sales perspective, what's a sales cycle like, what's your average deal size, just so people understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started Secure Vision, and it was a recruitment firm. Initially, all we did was contingent search, and since then we've expanded. We do a lot of retained business as well. We also do subscription and RPO, which is more so ongoing support. And we've most recently opened up more of a division specifically focused to outsourcing. So we actually have a subsidiary in Bucharest, Romania. So we have a pretty cool range of services. We've helped with greenhouse implementations and other talent solutions as well. And we're primarily working with hyper-growth, venture capital-backed software as a service growth stage companies. They could range from like Series A to B to late-stage organizations. We've worked with companies like WeWork, Grubhub, ThoughtSpot, MuleSoft, a lot of great organizations to help them hire and other talent-related projects. So our deal sizes can range. The search is slightly more transactional, but then on our retained models, we can have annual contracts that range anywhere from 60 to a few $100,000. So it's a little bit all over the place, but we're primarily targeting SMB growth stage organizations. We have a few publicly traded clients, but by and large, it's the growth stage SaaS companies that we're partnering with.
Now, there's something interesting that you mentioned, because you said you mentioned assisting with implementations, and I think you used our friend Sean Murray's company, Greenhouse, as an example. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of this term, and I've never heard of it before, but you can tell me if it exists. It's almost like you do recruiting ops. That's what I think of. I think of that because you got sales ops or revenue ops who are helping implement these tools. I've never heard of like this recruiting ops kind of angle. Is this a thing? Am I coining this phrase right now, or is this a thing?
I think you could coin it. No one ever talks about it. I think it's so my background before starting Secure Vision was in sales. So I was an SDR account executive. I came up in that world on the services side, not in SaaS. I always looked at things in recruitment and talent more so from like a sales funnel perspective. I think everything you do in sales and marketing, a lot of that you're doing in talent. But I don't think I think a lot of it has to do with budget for HR solutions. It's not quite as big as what you find in the revenue space. So people don't really break down the science of talent acquisition like they do in sales, right? And so that's what that's what I'm passionate about personally. Like I don't mind doing, we do searches, one-off searches all the time, but it's, to me, we really like getting deep into process tech and building the team. And we kind of use that as the framework, like process tech team, to go through and do an analysis of the environment and then just implement best practices. How do we bake that into technology so it's consistent, reportable, and scalable? And then how do we get the right team in place to manage that process?
And how do you figure out? How do you figure out what the right team looks like in a company like yours? There's God knows how many articles and blogs and people's opinions on like how to hire the best AE in a SaaS company, or how to hire for an SDR, right? How do you hire the best talent for your roles? Like a sourcer? I don't even know what you call it. It's like, is there still SDR AE for a recruiting company, or is it like sourcing or implementation? How do you find somebody? What do you look for there that's going to predict somebody's going to be successful in those kind of roles?
Sure. So I think it's over the years, I've definitely learned a lot more about this, and it's kind of funny. So I started my secure vision when I was 23, and so I didn't have a whole lot of, a ton of experience, and so I made a lot of very expensive mistakes, and I made so many mistakes, and all of those mistakes have now kind of laid the foundation to where we're actually growing and building, and it's kind of cool. So I made probably every wrong decision when it came to hiring for my own team that I possibly could make, which is hilarious. Because we
Like what?
started
Like,
off as a recruiting company, but at the beginning we made a lot of mistakes.
like
sure.
what hiring mistake? Like what kind of hiring?
Yeah. So when I started the business, we grew incredibly fast at first because I had the sales background, and we were also leveraging LinkedIn heavily in like 2015, and it was even less saturated at that point. So we would just straight up do something called candidate marketing, where we would drop, hey, just got off the phone with this account executive in New York City, 100K average deal size, 110% quota achievement over the past 3 years, working for a growth stage SaaS company, currently on the move, looking to join an earlier stage company to, whatever the story is, we'd post that story, and then we get a lot of inbounds as well that I would just, get on the phone, and we would just close and sign up. And so we were expanding quite rapidly. At one point, we were signing up 8 to 12 clients a month. We did about 36, a little over 30 accounts in a 3-month period. And so one of the initial mistakes that I made is, hey, we have all this open headcount, such a great opportunity. I'm going to go out and hire I hired 10 people, within a very short period of time. But the only way I was able to do that is I hired everyone at an entry level. Right. And so the realization that I had and this is for me in services, was, I'd rather have a smaller team that of killers that are just really good at sales, can manage the full desk, the whole relationship, than have a bigger team of more junior reps. Specific, and again, this is very specific to my business, but because whenever you're hiring, it's a lot of the complexity comes from the fact that it's very situational, and you really have to understand, particularly in sales, what's the point of impact for the reps, what is the enablement environment look like, what type of resources and support and structure and process and technology is going to be in place to help them be successful. And that's really going to define their point of impact in terms of the work they're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis. Are they going to be accountable for, doing all this stuff without having much of a support structure? And if that's the case, making sure that somebody comes from an environment where they have to be scrappy and resourceful, for instance. So it's pretty complex, but yeah, I think a lot of the judgment that I have now was built on going through and making a lot of mistakes in the early days, and getting to the point now where I have a much better pulse on the type of people we need to be successful.
Can you give some examples of impact, though? That's a good word, but it's buzzy.
Sure. So point of impact being, for instance, if you're hiring an account executive, right? This would be very common in our little universe, right? Growth stage SaaS companies. When you're hiring an account executive, you really want to understand the environment that they're coming from. Are they coming from an environment where they have, an SDR team, a sales engineering team, they have the totally decked out tech stack, and, their point of impact is a little bit more siloed in scope, where, they have a big marketing engine and an SDR team that's, providing those solid qualified opportunities that they can then move forward with? Or do they come from an environment where they're doing full life cycle sales, at least until the close, and or maybe they don't have the entire tech stack in place, maybe processes haven't been built out, maybe they're still defining or changing an ICP, and those types of things. When you're hiring the sales talent, you need to understand, if somebody comes from an incredible support structure that's built out with process, technology, enablement, and other specialists, and if they're thrown into an environment where there isn't that support structure, it's particularly for senior level reps, it's just been my experience that that's a very difficult transition. So understanding what's the point of impact of their current company, what are they driving?
So how do you,
that
interview
aligns
that person, right? So I'll give you an example, right? Someone decides, whether it's earlier or even later in their career, they've been at Salesforce, right, or Oracle or Zoom for a couple of years, right? They have this tremendous support system, tech stack, savviness to them, but they're like, you know what? I need to go early stage, right? I want to take my moonshot, right? I want to be one of the first reps. How do you interview that person to see if they can still be scrappy, right? Because to some extent, yeah, maybe we do want that seasoned veteran to be on the team because they can help us go up market or define that market, whatever, right? How do you interview that person as not necessarily as the recruiter, but also as the hiring manager, as that VP of sales or that CEO who's looking for their first salesperson?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So like if we put ourselves in the shoes of a VP of sales that's identifying, whether or not somebody can be resourceful. And I think, there are some things you can do to interview, and I'll get into that. I think the one thing is ideally if they are coming from a large company with a bigger support system, that at some point they've worked for a growth stage company. So ideally, it's like if they have some of that enterprise or some of that more established experience.
Maybe they haven't, right? Maybe they've been at Salesforce for 5 years, right? They came out of college, they got the SDR job, they then got promoted to AE. I think the path is often S&B AE, and then you can move up from there. But this person's still early enough in their career, but they've got several years of experience, but they've never built it before. How do you interview for that?
I think so. I'd be hesitant to interview someone from that background. I think for in a specific where it's very early stage where you need somebody that's proven, just because I would always be looking at like how do we minimize risk? Like there's always a risk when you hire people, and maybe this person could be very convincing that they could do well in that environment, but it's still a greater risk than finding somebody who's been in it. But let's say that you are interviewing for, like, as you said, so we're interviewing somebody and we need to understand, I'd be asking questions around, just their point of impact, how many hours they work, how work driven they kind of seem, maybe examples of times where they've taken on additional projects or done process improvement or, something related to going outside the normal scope of their JD, people that are like outcome focused, that have a good pulse in terms of business acumen and looking at what are the business outcomes we're trying to achieve, and maybe going outside of, the scope of their JD to help solve bigger problems for the company or for the team. That might be something that I'd focus on for if so we were considering.
Scott, only because I know Scott's a master recruiter, right? Scott is a sorcerer when it comes to hiring people, as much as he won't admit it. Scott, what do you think? What would be some of the things that you would encourage to look for and interview those people?
I think that they really have to understand the environment that they would be going into. And I think most don't. And I think that's probably where some of James's comments, are coming from. Because I don't think people are self-aware enough to understand the massive difference going from like a Salesforce to like a, Qualia when I had 2 reps, right? And we were still trying to figure things out. So I want somebody who truly understands. And I think I would want somebody who says, I specifically want to be thrown into the land of chaos. And here's why, right? Like I'll listen to that. I'll listen to that spiel and that pitch. And ultimately, I think the last thing would be, I want to know what their kind of longer term goal is, right? Like, why do they want to go there? Because what do they want to end up doing with this particular experience? I think those 3 things somebody has to ace with me. Or I think I'm in James's camp where I don't, I'm pretty hesitant.
So that's why you hired me way back when.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So
exactly.
And to the opposite, I support James' decision, which is why I didn't hire you.
Touche.
There's obviously exceptions. I just think it's when you're setting up like a process for a company, right? Like you want to do things that, okay, there's obviously going to be exceptions, but what do we do to minimize the risk, maximize the likelihood if we get the right person in the seat that's going to help us achieve our business outcomes? And so that's where you start looking at like averages and stuff like that. Now, obviously, it should be like more like a calculus exercise where you're actually like defined for that specific role. But sometimes having general kind of like philosophies can be beneficial toward like just minimizing risk for the company.
Now, I want to know about sourcing right now, and I'm trying to take my own cap off because I know what I would do, but I know this sounds very brash. I know a lot of people wouldn't be able to do what I can do in terms of recruiting. So like, are job boards dead? Does anybody look for candidates on like Indeed and, Monster, Career Builder, kind of stuff? Like, is everything like LinkedIn only? Like, where else do you even find people? I wouldn't even, you know what I mean? Where do people look? People come to you and have this kind of problem?
Yeah, so particularly for sales talent, LinkedIn's where it's at. I have just throughout the years made one-off investments. Most recently with Indeed, like a couple of years back, where we figured out, okay, what's the minimum time we need to really test the ROI, and it's pretty transactional since it's a job board. So we committed to I think like 45 days or something like that, at a run rate of like $3,000 a month. And so that's, a significant annualized contract value for an SMB, our company. And so we really need to see a result. And I think we had like, out of all the resumes we got for revenue oriented roles, like 3 of them seemed okay. And we never, nothing came of it. And so we ended up cutting it and investing more in LinkedIn.
In 45 days, you got 3 decent resumes.
Yeah, we got like three to 5 decent resumes. And I think we had a couple conversations, but it was pretty bad. And again, I think keeping in mind that we're working with a lot of growth stage SaaS companies. I mean, there's different industries and different spaces where it's going to be more relevant. But for us, it's just not like now I will say that there's, for instance, if you have with Greenhouse, it'll automatically push to Indeed and I think Monster as well for free. If you have Greenhouse, it'll just kind of push those out. And then LinkedIn limited postings, what it'll do is it's like an aggregate job board. So not all the jobs you see on LinkedIn are sponsored jobs that people are paying for. LinkedIn will actually pull jobs from different job boards and put it on LinkedIn. So there still can be value in the posting in the free slots for Indeed and the other job boards, because LinkedIn limited posting will actually pull those and put it on your company page. And so that's actually something, sometimes you can get good inbounds on LinkedIn, or I suppose from the other job boards, but the strategy really should be more so outbound for sales talent, outbound sourcing efforts on LinkedIn.
So I want to go back a little bit and sort of go back to that part where you're talking about hiring the right person, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And part of that is culture, right? Like, can they fit in this culture? And we interviewed a woman a few weeks ago, and she had this, I felt like it was a brilliant quote, and I've been using it a lot, which is that, culture isn't just defined by whether or not we like people, right? It's also defined by how easy is it to get shit done in the organization, right? And that's an interesting place. So one, just curious if you think that's a good quote, but also you are trying to help define culture in those organizations. And how do you help organizations define culture? What are the things you encourage them to think about? Because that's a big part of the recruitment process, is not just can they come in and do the job and execute, but there needs to be some kind of alignment on lots of different things.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's a cool quote. And I do agree with that. In terms of like helping companies define culture, I feel like it's just what are the outcomes, right? Like, what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve? And then just determining like what framework are we going to work within to solve these problems. So, whatever, like for a lot of growth stage companies, I mean, I think it's they're very outcome focused, they're very growth focused. And so, finding people that are aligned with that kind of outcome focused mentality is very important.
Which I think goes back to what you were saying earlier about like, look, you can't go hire, the Fortune 100 rep to come into a Series A, B company, right?
Unless you're, yeah, exactly. Unless it's like you're just pushing hard as hell to build out the support structure, right? Like you're building out, and you have to have the right people and resources in place to do that. And I'd say the majority of companies at that Series A, B stage don't have the resources to build out the enablement environment to really get the value that they're looking for out of a rep that comes from, one of enterprise players.
Yeah, I want to go in another different direction, right? One of the topics that's been, started last year in 2019. It's certainly, crossed the chasm, in my opinion, or is approaching crossing the chasm of the revenue team, right? The revenue ops, the CRO role, but there's still a lot of people who aren't there. And again, based on your experience and who you talk to, have you seen people adopting that earlier in the life cycle of their organization, or is it still the, hey, I need to find, my first or second rep, then I'll worry about a VP or a CRO? I'm just curious where you're seeing that, because I feel like that's all part of the conversation at some point.
Sure. I think I've started to see like a gradual trend over the years to investing faster in process and technology and optimization prior to scaling out. I feel like even when I started the company and before that, I feel like there was more of a sense of like, hey, let's go out and hire, we just got funding, let's go out and hire like 10 people, off the bat. And I feel like now companies are starting to take a little bit more mature approach where it's like, hey, well, let's optimize our process and our technology to get the most out of and help the people that we've employed. And then let's gradually start to hire. So I am starting to see, for instance, sales enablement roles pop up in earlier stage organizations than maybe when I had started the company. Yeah.
Right away. That's,
yeah.
I think you got more people out there doing what I do, which is like, nope, I'm not taking that VP of sales job, James. You know why? Because they won't let me hire a sales ops person or a rev ops person straight away.
Yeah.
I think revenue leaders are starting to understand more the value of revenue ops and staying like in their own lane. Like I could go try to build all this stuff. I'm going to do terrible with it. And not only am I going to do a terrible job that somebody's going to have to fix later, it's going to distract me from all the other work that I need to be doing. Maybe I'm being overly optimistic that that's the trend, but I think there's a little bit more of that going on.
Well, I think it's one of those things. It's like, companies learn the hard way, right?
Yeah.
It's like where, you go through it enough, and if you don't have the right ops and enablement in place, it can become a big challenge. So it just makes sense to invest in those things prior to scaling out a massive org where, you got a lot of your reps working at like 60% potential capacity because the right process and tech and leadership or whatever else isn't in place to enable the sales force. It's huge.
I got another question. I'm sort of bouncing around on some topics, but these are the ones that we talk about a lot, and I think people need to keep hearing them. When you're working with your particular companies, right? I've been a big believer, I think Scott has too, of you always hire 2 reps at minimum, right? Because you're not necessarily committing. Now, Scott's, for those who are just listening, Scott held up 3.
3 reps.
And so, because you don't know where it's going to go, and you're not really committing to 3 annual salaries, right? You're committing to, just under 1 salary for 90 days to figure out which is the right fit. And if you've done it right, or, you've struck gold, 2 or 3 of them will be there and you can accelerate faster. So I'm curious, does that conversation come up with the early stage companies or even your later stage companies? Because I still, it's a massive resource suck to hire 1 person to train them and then have them.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's just, I feel like that's like so situational though, right? Like particularly for early stage companies, a lot of it depends on budget and financing and what they're able to do. But yeah, I think particularly for earlier stage companies, just like being able to optimize by onboarding a couple, 2, 3 people at once is ideal. But I still think that you really just ironing out a talent acquisition vetting process properly so that, regardless if you're hiring, even if you hire multiple people at once, the cost of a bad hire is still pretty expensive. There's a huge opportunity cost, even if you are splitting some of that onboarding time between another rep. Making sure that you have the right kind of vetting process in place to one, maximize to primarily to optimize the likelihood that the person's going to work out, right? So I think that that's something where maybe a lot of startups are still operating a bit on feel, opposed to having like an optimized kind of recruitment process in place with custom questions that's consistent from interview to interview, and are vetting people objectively. I think that's like probably a bigger concern for me when people are hiring multiple reps quickly at an early stage, is that maybe the TA process isn't built out enough to ensure that they're hiring the right people, and then they do have fall offs occurring 3-6 months in, which
God, he's telling you you've been doing it wrong.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I like the multiple hires things. I just think that a lot of early stage companies get in trouble when they do multiple hires and they don't know exactly what they're looking for. They don't know how to vet the people properly.
Yeah, that's the difference, Richard.
Right.
He's talking about they don't know what they're looking for. They don't know how to vet the people properly.
Right.
Right. That's a difference.
And they got three people on payroll, and they're not, none of them are producing the result. And it's like,
yeah. Look, I have multiple clients that I've dealt with in the last couple of years that when I've talked to, it's like, oh yeah, Richard and James, they've been doing sales for a couple months. So I start digging into Richard and James's background. It's like, James has a finance degree and Richard, has an MBA. Neither one of them has ever done sales. They don't even know what they want to do with their life. They're just like an early stage startup generalist. And the founders are like, oh, you two fuckers, you should go, try to do sales. And so there they are trying to do sales.
Yeah.
Like that, that's not a good way to roll. That's not gonna end well typically. Right. So
I'm just huge into like real relevant experience. Like when you start to get into like reading whether or not like somebody is going to be the right fit and taking that risk, at an early stage, I don't know. It just makes me nervous. Like, just find the person who's done it before, has been successful, has consistently hit a quota, not just like Q3 in 2017 and they put that on their resume. Then there's no other quota. Somebody who's consistently hit goal and can get references from previous direct managers. And again, there's plenty of people that maybe can't get a reference from a previous direct manager that might be really, really good. But it's in terms of at an early stage minimizing risk and just putting up, if you can't get it, maybe they're the best sales rep in the world. If I can't get that reference, if I can't see the consistent quota achievement, it's just at this point where we're at as a company, it's too much risk. Maybe when we're later stage and we're hiring 5-10 reps at a time, maybe at that point it makes sense, right? But at this point, early stage, it's like nothing beats like just having been in a very relevant environment and consistently producing results. Like that's just so. Just index that to the max. I feel like at an early stage.
I want to think about being in a particular environment and stay with that for a minute, because I don't know if you know this, Richard. James spent nearly a year in and around the White House and Congress, working for a congressman and then in the White House itself. Can you tell us a little bit, James, what that experience was like, what you learned from it, and what you vowed ever to do that they do wrong?
Yeah, it was a very frustrating experience. It was interesting and I'm really thankful for it, but it's weird when you're around that. I grew up in the DC area, so a lot of politics talk in general, and there was just different opportunities, given where I was, where I'm located. But it's very frustrating. I think one of the things that frustrated me the most was that, whether it's a congressman, any congressman, they'd have these big, press hearings where they would talk about a stance on an issue, and then that was the end of it. There was most of the time, 99 times out of 100, there's no action taken. It's like, hey, this is what I think. And then let's move on to the next meeting to talk about what I think there. And then I'll move on to the next. And there just wasn't a whole lot. And so that was just, for me, I think an eye opener that I really wanted to be in private industry and just something that's more so like outcome focused, right? A little bit more action, a little less talk.
What
But
you're saying
they were
is
good
the sales cycle's
experiences.
too long in the White House. And
Yeah.
Congress, right?
I was practically in the mailroom, so
Gotcha.
yeah, it was a cool experience, and at the time it was
What were some of the fun things about it though, right? Like I know there's regardless of the aisle side, right? What were
yeah.
fun things that you enjoyed?
Yeah, I'd say the fun things was just going to some of these meetings where they were discussing, foreign policies and just I think the guest speakers was probably the most compelling part because you'd have people from different parts of the world coming in to share their story and their experience in some different regions and being able to hear that. And because usually that you always hear the congressman's like statement, right? But you don't always hear the guest speakers. They don't always make it on the news where they're talking about their experiences, what's really like to come from that, in that environment and the challenges that they're dealing with anywhere in the world. And so that was probably the most the thing I'm most thankful for is just kind of like being able to it's an eye opener when you're actually there and like they have it's people from all over the world speaking. It's pretty cool. Yeah.
Do you think that the politicians are, and I've seen on both sides, so I'm not picking on one side or the other, that does that tell me that they actually do have the details to make good decisions, but they have to act in, for lack of a better phrase, so stupidly for the news bites of the news?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I feel like there's plenty of information out there, right? I mean, and they certainly have any resource that's available to any of us. They, they certainly have. So, yeah, I feel like it's again, it's more about talk and hey, when I say this, how is that going to impact? Who's going to fund me? Who's going to vote? Yeah, it's all based. That's the outcome, right? And that's what the issue, right? The outcome is on how do I stay where I'm at versus how do I actually move the ball, like move the needle, like on the things that people care about. It's just more so how do we continue perpetuate me being in this seat, right? And that's kind of at least
They're always looking for their next round of funding without actually execution.
right. Yeah, yeah. I imagine that in growth stage SaaS, right? Like you don't execute, you're out. you know, that's how it works here.
Except in Congress, sometimes you don't execute and you're still in, right? Like that's
Right,
the
right, right.
problem. And I think some of it falls on us as the general public to, again, do our research and stop reading the headlines. So
I agree. Yeah.
Is that something that you take with you now as you lead and are in charge of a company, like faster decision making, and that's skewed towards action rather than deliberating on something forever?
Oh, 100%. Being decisive is so incredibly important. I believe in the mindset of make a decision quickly. If you're gonna screw up fast, and move on and learn from it. I mean, obviously you got to tier that. If you have a decision that could tank a business, don't make that without doing. You got to make sure you. But I think generally speaking, it's better to make decisions, go all in, make decisions, stick to it, and it's even better to make a decision and then if you got to change in 6 months, fine. But being decisive and just moving forward because when you move forward, maybe there's solutions out there that you don't see currently, but if you keep taking steps forward, then other things are going to appear, right? Other solutions are going to appear, but you got to move, and that stagnation of not making a decision can kill companies.
How do you teach somebody, or can you teach somebody to make decisions faster and live and learn with the results and the consequences?
Yeah, I think so. I think you can influence people if you know what already influences them, and if you can speak in terms of like their values and what they care about in terms of from a management perspective, you can certainly help people become more decisive and tactfully aggressive at the right times and these types of things. I mean, people have their natural wiring, right? But certainly, yeah. I mean, you can influence people. You can influence people to make faster decisions or many other things. You just have to understand what they're motivated by, right? And tap into that and help them understand that what you're sharing with them is going to enable them to get more of whatever they're after, whatever motivates them, whatever feeling or thing that they're after. That's a big part of leading people. And one of the most important things is like leadership, whether it's VP of sales or CEO or anything else, is like not only the skill set, right, but a big part of it is like getting people to move with you. Like, how do you bring people along with the thing that you need to do and work cross-functionally with everybody else to make sure they're moving with you? I mean, influence is a huge part of it, right?
So how do you do that, right? Like how, just as for those leaders who are listening, how do you try to encourage that? You know, if you were coaching someone or when you, from your own experience, right? Which even goes back to this congressional White House stuff, right? How do you get people to move?
Well, yeah, I was an intern, so I just want to qualify that. It's not like I was making decisions then, but it's just it's a good experience. But yeah, I think it's being obsessed with outcome. You have to be obsessed with outcome, and that's for growth stage companies, getting people that are obsessed with outcome. Because if you're obsessed with outcome, you go from worrying about the politics of trying to, and you start to focus on like everything else is secondary. Like, how do we achieve the goal? Like, what are we trying to get done? And then what are the right steps to make that happen? And so, when you're trying to get people to move with you, you guys know Jake Dunlap. Like, he has a lot of, I really like his content. And, one of the things he was recently talking about in sales is your job is not to necessarily educate. Your job is to get people to move. Like, and I thought like, oh, that's slick. I really like that because it's, you can't be overly worried about like tact and comfort and all of these other things. Your job is to figure out what's the outcome, what's the solution we need, and then I got to get people to move. And again, it's just aligning with goals and department specific outcomes, and just being able to have those conversations where people see, okay, we need to make this decision because it'll get us to where we need to go. And you can't do. I know that sounds kind of vague, but I feel like it's just like you have to know the specific values and motivations and outcomes that other leaders and other people of your team are trying to achieve, and you just got to tap into those and bring them under the umbrella of the actual vision of like the company, and just get people to move. Be willing to be tactfully aggressive. You got to be able to communicate effectively, but you got to be willing to have some uncomfortable conversations. You got to be able to push people. You have to be able to be willing to, hopefully not step on toes if you're tactful enough, but you have to be willing to, you might occasionally step on the line. It's better to step on the line occasionally than never come anywhere near it and not get anything done.
Yeah, and I'd love to know a little bit more, but we're running up on time. Before we ask our last couple of questions, shout out to Find Them, Perception Predict, Gong, and Lead 411, our sponsors. But what are those uncomfortable conversations? You got to have those. Is that like, hey, you're not performing? Is it the standard? We need to have the performance conversation. We need to have the what is it going to take to get you there kind of thing? Is that what you're talking to?
Yeah, it definitely can, and it's that. It can also be about discussing, potential fires, like, potential fires and things that could be coming up in the next 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 2 months, and not doing such in a way where you're like this doomsday person that's always talking, but you have to be thinking forward in terms of like, these are the things that could, these are the holes we could fall in. Here's the things that can kill us. And, I always like to my reps, I've always said, where's the thing that can kill the deal? Where is it? And my thought process, they say they say they can't find it. I say, if you don't see it, it doesn't mean it's not there. It just means that you don't know where it is. And so where is it? And just, drilling into that. I mean, those types of conversations, performance conversations are important. Like, I'm a big advocate, like performance reviews should be done quarterly. It should be a consistent thing, not just when things aren't, going well. A big part of enabling, get the best out of people is to be able to have a straightforward feedback loop where you're able to share, like, this is what you're doing well. This is, you're doing great, but if you want to be exceptional, make these adjustments, or you're not doing well, but you need to make these adjustments. I feel like performance reviews are a big thing that should be a bigger emphasis for a lot of growth companies too.
I love that quote. Where's the thing that can kill the deal? And if you don't know where it is, it just means you haven't found it. It doesn't mean it's not there. And I think like that is probably one of the best questions I've heard that you could do for pipeline. I'm going to I'll obviously give you credit, but I'm going to put that out early.
Awesome.
That's a genius line.
Thanks,
Anyway, so we got to wrap it up, but just, we always sort of like to end the show of, what can we do to help you? How can we support you with your business, with your organization? Or is there something that you're, a project outside of work that you're focused on, you want to bring some light to?
I really appreciate it. I mean, honestly, you guys you have done a lot to help me. I follow your content, and I really appreciate everything that you guys do for the sales community. I honestly, I can't think of anything in particular. I mean, I just, right now we're focused on growing the business and client acquisition and growing and basically taking all the lessons from the past few years and learning from it. And now with more insight in how to execute effectively, like that's, kind of where I'm at and where the business is at. We're growing. We made it through the hardest, hopefully the hardest days of COVID, and we're on track. We're growing. So I appreciate your ask, but I really don't have an ask on my end. This has been fun. So that's all I got.
Kudos to you for successfully navigating the last, 9 months or however long it's been, and continuing to push forward. So thanks for spending some time with us, James. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. This has been a blast. Thank you.
Thanks, James. We appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.